to better understand each other, to also celebrate our identities and our diverse culture, and also to build coalition for social change, right? So having said that, I wanted to bring Hugo Teruel from Lares to say a few words, and just the way that this is going to develop is each presenter, each author will just introduce briefly the next one so that we can move the program along, okay? Thank you so much.
Hi, welcome to UIC and to the Cultural Center. My name is Hugo Teruel. I'm the Executive Director of the Latin American Recruitment Educational Services Program, commonly known as the LATIS program. So it's good to see all of you that write down our stories and keep that information alive and then inform the youth here today. And I look forward to hearing some of your stories and reading some of the stories from the books. So welcome and thank you again.
There is an incredible amount of talent in the room, and I think you will hear it quite soon. Reached into the Midwest and has tried to pluck out these little stories here and there, wherever they might be. She represents a story that I would like to know more about. But there's lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of stories. So all of the authors here, the books here, are all about that in some fashion or another. And it's just wondrous, I think, and I am so happy that all of this should be able to come together.
I'm a senior acquisitions editor at the press, and what that means is that I get the pleasure of acquiring books in a variety of areas. I work on 12 series, and one of the series I'm very proud to work on is Latinos in Chicago and the Midwest. So we're here today to celebrate that series, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the history of it. From the beginning, the mission of the series has been to foster scholarship on the Midwestern Latino experience and expand the focus from the Latino experience on the coast and the Southwest. And over time, the series has become known for its interdisciplinarity, for publishing both early career and established scholars, and for highlighting the histories of Latinos in Chicago while striving to branch out to represent other Midwestern regions and experiences. In 2018, the series welcomed two new co-editors, Suhe Vega and Omar Valerio Jimenez. Omar was a co-editor of the Latino Midwest Reader, which is for sale right over there. And that was published in the series in 2017. And now in 2019, we're celebrating 15 vibrant years in the series. And what I love so much about this series is that it has done exactly for me what its mission was to do, to draw attention to the Latino experience beyond the borderlands, the Southwest, and the coast that people tend to default to. I look forward to its vibrant future, and I want to thank the many collaborators for this event today. It really was remarkable to see it come together. We're honoring both the past and the future of the series, and I'm especially honored that I'm glad that the press is able to donate a collection of the series books to this wonderful Latino Cultural Center library and such a great campus organization. And now, I'm going to turn this over to Mary Rua so we can hear some words from Frances herself.
These are some words that Frances sent along because she's teaching tonight, so she couldn't join us out in Milwaukee. So in 2019, the Latinos in Chicago and the Midwest book series celebrates its 15th year in existence. I want to acknowledge and thank the support of the University of Illinois Press in making this series a reality. Having published by now 15 titles since our inception in 2004, the series has become an important institutional space for scholarly contributions that focus on Latinx communities in our region. Our growth would not have been possible without the original support of former U of I Press Editor-in-Chief, Joan Carapano, who believed in the project and the serious commitment, leadership, energy, and invaluable work of the current acquisition editor, Don Durante, as well as all the staff and personnel in the press. Under the leadership of our two new co-editors, Suhe Vega and Omar Valerio Jimenez, and all the authors who trusted our leadership and published with us, the series continues to be more visible as it legitimates the centrality of the Midwest in understanding the experiences of Latinx communities in the United States. I have to confess that when I first thought of this book series, I was truly worried that it may be too limited by its regional parameters. However, I now believe that the series has indeed been timely in capturing the increasing scholarship about the Latino Midwest that at times is unduly undermined by other presses in the East and West Coast. After a dynamic and diverse collection of titles, history, anthropology, memoir, cultural studies, and visual arts, among others, I envision many more years of growth. Francis Aparicio. So as I was saying, my name is Merida Rua. I'm a new faculty member at Northwestern University, Latinx Studies. The book that I'm reading from is a book that I edited in 2010. And can you all hear me?
Yes.
And so it's an edited volume that the core of it is the master's thesis of Elena Padilla, who was a graduate student at the University of Chicago in the 1940s. So in many ways, when the U of I Press, when the Latinos in the Chicago Midwest series started, one of the things that it wanted was also to recover certain texts that were seminal in terms of our understanding of a Latin in Chicago, but really had never kind of seen publication light outside of either a thesis or papers or things like that. What we wanted to do with this project is rather than just kind of reprint the thesis, we wanted it to be not only a recovery project, but also to show how generative this particular thesis had been. So the work of Elena Padilla in the 1940s was, as a graduate student getting her master's thesis, she worked on Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in Chicago. It was a comparative study of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans in Chicago, and then Puerto Ricans and Italians in New York City. And she wanted to really get a sense of how much does place matter, right? How much does it matter in terms of who you're surrounded by in terms of the migration experience? What does that do to your sense of a collective sense of self? But what are also the kinds of opportunities that people have based on place? So what kinds of industry were they a part of? How did they get there, right? What were they recruited to do? And then who were they surrounded by? And things like that. So one of the things that I wanted to do today was, rather than read the pieces from my own piece or even the three other edited chapter or 3 other chapters from the edited volume, I wanted to read from Elena Padilla's own preface, because I think one of the things that makes this book really special to me is that she was part of this project. Too many times we do recovery projects when the people are gone and they have no say, right, in how it is that their scholarship had been taken up. And so she was very much a central part of making this project happen and in really communicating and collaborating with the younger generation of scholars. So I wanted to read from her preface, her prologue, I should say, looking back and thinking forward. The study comparing Puerto Ricans in Chicago with Puerto Ricans in New York was in effect an effort by a then young graduate student to find out if anthropological methods and techniques could be applied to learn how a population of migrants of common backgrounds, who for all practical socioeconomic and cultural purposes were immigrants living in 2 different American cities, differed or were they similar to each other. The study was largely provoked by the work of William I. Thomas and Florin, I can't ever say his name, I can't remember, I don't know how to say his name. Largely on Polish peasants in Europe and the United States, as well as by the Yankee City studies of Lloyd Warner, and by studies on urbanization by C. Everett Hughes, Robert E. Park, and Robert Redfield, and Louis Worth, who at the time were the social science brain trust of the University of Chicago. The study was done to meet requirements for the master's degree in the anthropology department. It was the first scholarly effort by someone trying to be but not yet born an anthropologist. The Chicago-New York investigation was guided by the following questions. What happens to the social arrangements and social beliefs of an immigrant population when its members move from their homeland to live in 2 different American cities? Does living in proximity with people of the same social class and cultural background make a difference? And if so, what kind of difference for them in this new society? If that happens to be the case, how applicable are the concepts of human ecology, adaptation, acculturation, and assimilation to understanding their accommodation to living in an American city? These questions were also stimulated by the personal experiences of observing and participating in protest activities of these 2 Puerto Rican migrant subgroups in the 1940s. Can a study as this be conducted today among Puerto Rican migrants and Mexican immigrants and migrants in the current socio-political and economic context? Has the status of knowledge changed, and if so, how? following is an exploration of these questions in a forward mode. And I just want to skip to the part where she talks about Latino-Hispanic solidarity. In a cultural historical perspective, the Hispanic solidarity in the United States has its roots in Spanish conquest, in the Spanish conquest of the New World. This led to distinct national and regional cultural and ecological adaptations and political solidarity strengthened by their liberation from Spain in Latin America. Yet the structural relation between and among Spanish-speaking populations in the United States as Latinos, Hispanics, first initiated by the White House, became more a product of American educational, political, and economic institutions formalized by the US Census, which presumably used these designations for simplification. Such definition has been developed by the Office of Management and Budget and standardized in 2003. These designations simplify statistical complication and analyses, but were not based on a process of linguistic and cultural integration or assimilation with those populations. Hispanics or Latinos came to be a national classification for persons identified as Cuban, Mexican, Puerto Rican, South or Central American, or other Spanish culture or origins, regardless of race. Nonetheless, it has to be observed that Hispanics are not a monolithic group, and the official extension of a national classification to small local areas and districts leads to confusion and intergroup tension. As Juan Flores put it, quote, "It is that core of resistance, that self-affirmation, that makes the Puerto Rican case so deeply revealing." End of quote. Thus, the sense of national identity of Puerto Ricans, qua Puerto Ricans, in New York and in Chicago has continued as self-reference based on social and cultural values and standards of behavior continue, especially those that are linked to family relations. As rapid changes have occurred in the processes of social, economic, and political urbanization in Chicago and New York, and in their surrounding suburbs, the question emerges about what has happened to minorities in such contexts. When so-called urban slums have been quote-unquote trumped and have given way to large expensive condos, how do minorities cope? Research is needed to understand to understand better the contemporary conceptualizations of urban living and the opportunities and limitations that minorities face. Anything else is political commentary. And here she adds, there's a difference between reporting the theoretical basis and findings of a research activity and doing research to confirm rather than question one's personal political views. Still, one can be an anthropologist in training and go for additional training in other fields. One can still be an anthropologist who goes beyond the traditions of the field. So here she's actually making a case for interdisciplinarity, right? And she ends, what follows is the original text of the master's thesis as approved by the anthropology department at the University of Chicago in 1947. Further research on social and cultural transformation in Chicago is needed in order to assess change appropriately. Elena Padilla, May 29th, 2010, New York City. Okay.
Hi everybody, my name is John Flores, and I'm a professor of immigration and labor history at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And I also serve there as the co-director of the Social Justice Institute. And I'm the author of The Mexican Revolution in Chicago. And what I thought I'd do, and I'm putting my timer on here because I know our time is precious and I want to be very respectful of everybody's time, and you all are here and I really appreciate that. So I thought what I'd do is, as opposed to reading selections from the book, I'd give you sort of my take on three important questions that are sort of close to my heart, which is, why did I write this book? Why did I write it? How did I write it? And what did I hope to try to use the book to teach us about Mexican immigrants? That was really the goal of the book. So broadly ideologically speaking, like, why did I write it? I wrote it to change the way Americans think about Mexican immigrants. I read a lot of books about Mexican immigrants. I read about people who work hard, who start families, who go to church, and who often experience intense discrimination and oppression. But I don't read about people in the 1920s, 1930s, when I'm writing about them, who I would characterize as, and who I show are intellectuals, who are doing all sorts of profound intellectual things to try to challenge the oppression that they experience, the discrimination that they experience. I don't read about people who are arriving as doctors and engineers and are using those skills to uplift their community members. I didn't read about the diversity of the Mexican community that I have in my own family, where my family is itself divided by different kinds of political visions of what it means to be Mexican. I didn't read about that diversity in a lot of the literature that I was reading. And I wanted to write a book that would capture that diversity and would also inspire young Mexican Americans by showing them that they have a long history in the United States, a long and rich political history, that Mexican immigrants have been engaged in all sorts of political activities for generations. I wanted to show that in the book. And in terms of what was sort of the how-to, how I did this, at the time, I had a very basic kind of historical question. So this is a sort of more narrow issue, more narrow focus here, which was, which Mexicans, or how many Mexicans, even in Chicago, became U.S. citizens in the time period from when they first began arriving in the early 1900s to, let's say, the 1950s. Just that cluster of time, those 50 years. How many? And when I would look at books about this, they would offer estimates. It was very common to find books that say, this is the percentage that probably did. And they were often basing those estimates on studies that were conducted in other places. And at the time, and I would say to this day, one of the most influential studies on Mexican assimilation was George Sanchez's Becoming Mexican American. So that was the book that was handed to me that sort of asked that question of LA. And the reason I say that at that point and to this day, that book is still so influential is because Sanchez did something methodologically very important. He went through and collected all the naturalization records of every Mexican national who applied for U.S. citizenship in the Federal District Court of Los Angeles between 1900 and 1940 and created a database of some 2,238 Mexican nationals. So at the time, this was profound because these records aren't organized by nationality. So you have to kind of go through all of them as you collect, as you extract these records, and then you're able to say specific things about those people who chose to become U.S. citizens. So since I had a similar question for Chicago, I jumped into the National Archives here and into the federal court records, and I extracted the naturalization records of every Spanish-speaking immigrant who applied for naturalization in Chicago between 1900 to 1940, creating a census of 3,110 Spanish-speaking immigrants, 1,893 of whom are Mexican nationals. And with this database, which to my knowledge is the largest historical database of Hispanic naturalization, I can speak specifically, and what I would argue is substantively in a valid way, about not only how many Mexicans became U.S. citizens in Chicago, but a more important question, which the research started showing me, which is which Mexicans became Mexican Americans in Chicago, and which Mexicans chose to remain Mexican nationals. And so, while I was drawing and in some ways expanding on George Sanchez's methodology, what I saw was his focus was on those who became U.S. citizens over time. And what I found, and many of you know that, and we can read other books that talk about this, is the vast majority of Mexican immigrants never became U.S. citizens. And so the question was, why were some choosing to become U.S. citizens? Why did that 1,893 choose? And why did so many other Mexicans refrain? Why? And so as I began going through the records, I was able to use my census and to compare it to qualitative sources, sources in Mexican consular records, newspapers, and all sorts of other sources to construct a history of the communities that chose not to become U.S. citizens and those who chose. And what I began seeing is that the politics of the Mexican Revolution of 1910 were the most important sort of variable shaping whether a Mexican immigrant would choose to become a U.S. citizen. So the vast majority of books tend to look at things that happen on this side of the border, and the way events on this side of the border end up shaping whether or not an immigrant decides to become a U.S. citizen. But what I was finding in my work was all of these Mexicans all envisioned that at one point they'd be returning back to their beloved homeland. And so the question was, how are politics changing there? And is return even possible? Because if you believe your Mexico is being created there, you were more likely to remain a Mexican national and hope to return. If, however, you were disappointed by what was being created there, you were more likely to say, I have no choice but to become a U.S. citizen. And so as I was constructing these narratives, I began seeing that there were these political communities that I describe as liberal, radical, and traditionalist. And in these communities, I saw that the liberals and the radicals, as different as they were with each other, they shared a political perspective that has a lot to teach us today about Mexican immigration. That is, the liberals and the radicals tended not to become U.S. citizens. And the reason they chose not to become US citizens is because they understood something that many American citizens don't know today, which is that Americans have a long history of going into third world nation states, profiting, working, extracting natural resources, and living, and they don't become citizens of those nation states. And the liberals and the radicals started looking at what Americans were doing in Mexico, Nicaragua, Honduras, all over Latin America. They started talking about US corporations there and what they were doing, and whether those US corporate managers were becoming Mexican citizens and Nicaraguan citizens. They started looking at their policies, and they started looking at US military bases in places like Honduras and Puerto Rico. And they started saying, look at what the US does. United Statesians, or Americans, North Americans, migrate across the world, and no one is compelling them to become US citizens. And no one is forcing them to do this, and there's a sense that they can come and go as they please. So what I found is these liberals and radicals, as much as they disagreed with each other on all sorts of things, and I talk about these communities as distinct communities, and they would probably be very offended, the fact that I'm talking about them as a group, but nevertheless what they shared was a belief that they didn't have to become US citizens because Americans are in their countries, and Americans are all over the world doing all kinds of things. And that's not part of our discussion of immigration and assimilation. It wasn't then, and it still remains not part of our discussion now. We still don't talk about the Walmarts, the General Electric plants, the General Motors plants, and our military bases that are everywhere. Somehow that's not part of any discussion of comprehensive immigration reform. It's as though people from all over the world just come here, and we never go anywhere. And so long as we have such a one-sided conversation, such an invalid, false conversation about immigration, I don't think we're ever going to develop comprehensive immigration reform. And that's what the liberals of the 1920s or the radicals of the 1930s in my book show me as well. So the question is, who is becoming a US citizen? And what I found was that Mexican conservatives were outraged by the anti-clerical aspect of the Mexican Revolution, which began pushing them away from Mexico, their beloved homeland. And then with the election of Plutarco Calles, they became outraged by his anti-clerical policies, which in many ways engendered the violent Cristero Rebellion of 1926. And then with the election of Lázaro Cárdenas in the 1930s, they were even more outraged that a so-called socialist now was going to destroy their country. So these communities who are debating naturalization are seeing that more and more and more, as they argued, the revolution had unleashed a radical culture that made their homeland somewhere where they could never return to. And in the context of thinking about their choices, they are being repeatedly and repeatedly targeted by the US government for deportation, regardless of their political position. So whether you're a liberal, a radical, or you're a conservative, in the early 1920s, I document that the US government is trying to deport them. In the 1930s, the US government is trying to deport them. In the 1950s, the US government is trying to deport them. The Mexican people have a totally unique and exceptional history in the United States, as they are the only population that has been incorporated through state-sponsored labor recruitment programs and been deported from the United States by the hundreds of thousands. No other group of people has been incorporated by the hundreds of thousands and then deported by the hundreds of thousands. And so as all these communities are being attacked, what they say is, we have no choice but to become US citizens because we can't return to our beloved country of origin, and we need a political shield to protect ourselves here from deportation. And that's a very different understanding of assimilation in the way that plays out for the Mexican community than the way I see that plays out for many other, almost all other immigrant groups. And maybe in the Q&A, we can talk more about that. Thank you.
I want to first say, in general, that some of you, and there's a lot of people here who have studied different things about the Mexican community and the Latino communities of Chicago, know that this series really has not just been a repository of different texts, but also a place where texts have been generated, as in the case of Merida Ruiz's work on Elena Padilla, being so important. And John Flores, I think, is the first one to provide this perspective on the older communities, very different from what we see in other recent research. Of course, there were people writing about the Mexican community in the 20s and 30s in dissertations and master's theses, and they have never been adequately collected nor published, and I know that there have been efforts to do that. Even a bigger scandal would be the case of the most seminal work that everybody cites in their studies of the Mexican community, and that is Luis Año Nuevo Kerr's dissertation, which never became a book, partially, I guess, because Luis was caught up in doing administrative work. They were always trying to get Latinos to do this administrative work that put a Latino face on a basically white institution. And so she probably never got the time or the energy to get her to do it, and it still hasn't been done. It's a project that should be done. There was a long period when there was very little done in the way of publications after the theses of the 1930s until the Aztlán issue of 1976, and then Luis's book, which came, or dissertation, which came out in 1979. And after that, there's another big dip. I can only think of a few cases, some of them forgotten. Ruth Horowitz's book on the Mexican community, Honoring the American Dream. And getting into the 90s, we have Ralph Cintrón wonderful book. I think, what year is that?
97.
97, Angel Town, which I used to teach all the time, Ralph, because it was such a wonderful book on the way people in a community, a threatened community, fend for themselves and build a sense of identity in the face of feeling that they were losing all self-respect. It was a wonderful text. And I guess Nick DeGenova did his work on the Mexican community and also co-wrote one on the Puerto Rican community. And the Puerto Rican materials burgeoned first after Helena Padilla, many years later with the books of Felix Padilla, no relation, who did a series of books of great importance, including one that crossed over into Mexican questions and the question of a kind of Latino identity emerging out of these other questions. I want to point to that history because many parts of it have not been published yet. They still can be done, and there's many older things that are still there that are worth putting together. I think we've seen a current of new publications, including Arredondo's book and Michael Jimenez's book, and of course, certainly I can't think of the names, but there are several others that one could cite. And I was very happy when Frances Aparicio, who was my chair, said, "I've got it." She was no longer my chair when that happened. I had already moved to Houston. But I was very happy. I said, I have lots of material. I might be able to contribute something. But I never expected to contribute at least one of the two books, or either of the books, really, that I did contribute to the series. I was in Houston when I was virtually attacked by three leading Chicano, old guard, male Chicano leaders who told me, "You're a friend of Jose Gonzalez." Yeah, and you also write books. Yeah. I said, "Well, where is your book on Jose Gonzalez?" I said, "He's my friend. I didn't expect to write a book about him." He said, "Well, you need a book about him." I said, "Well, I don't know much about art. We need the book." So Jose, who wasn't in the greatest of health, accepted the fact that he was going to be bombarded with interview after interview over a period of several years, me bouncing back and forth from Houston to interview him, and finally we did a book. And I guess the book emerged, and it's, I guess, the only one at that time, and maybe still, about an artist activist, an artist with a particular community vision, trying to bring artists together to become more than just separate artists working, but to relate to community and build something. It was called Movimiento Artístico Chicano. Jose had shows of Dia de los Muertos. He kind of almost invented it here in Chicago, revived a tradition that people still had in their homes, but it was not a public art event. It did not have that dimension to it. And Jose was really the founding voice in that, more than anybody else. The people he brought to Chicago from Mexico and elsewhere became part of the scene here for several years, developing the cultural life. The whole question of gentrification, he was one of the first artists to talk about gentrification, have a conference about gentrification, and then collaborated with Teresa in a conference about gentrification some years on, because he had this kind of vision. I'm only going to read a small bit from his invocation to this. A passage he narrated to me, and I felt that I should use it as an invocation. "This will be the story of my life." And here is, by the way, Jose Gonzalez, right here. "This will be the story of my life, my work as a Mexican artist and arts promoter in Chicago's Mexican community. There's so much to tell, and I'm not sure I can tell it all. Sometimes I think I'm losing memory. I remember the order and dates of things and the things more or less, but I seem to leave out the details. Then I remember the smallest things, but the details are confused and kind of hazy. I can't quite get it, or I guess I don't get at the importance some of these things might have had for me or others. I would never have told the story, but Mark Zimmerman told me how 3 Latino leaders ganged up on him, saying it was important to have my story and that he should do this book, and Mark said he'd try. I'm proud of what they said because they're important and knowledgeable Latinos, and I guess they made me feel that Mark should try too. So I decided not to let illness or any problem stop me from doing my best to tell my story. I guess I'll leave for others to say if I got it right or not. Some will argue that this is a happy story of a man who did important things in the face of difficulties. Some will say it's the sad story of a man who failed, a failure who didn't achieve what he wanted to and could have or couldn't have succeeded. Others will say it's the story of a community pioneer, but someone who didn't do as much as he wanted and wants to cry about things that stopped him from doing the great things he would never have been able to do anyway. I know I've always been a dreamer, a Catholic dreamer and artist. I guess trying to do what God made it maybe possible for me to do as best I could. And of course I've always been a Mexican, trying to do my art for my people as much as for myself. But this is my story as my friend Mark got me to tell it. You and I will have to judge what to make of it. And I think it's a very singular kind of story, but it's a story of somebody who was living in Indiana, and perhaps because he was not in Chicago, was more open to a Chicano current, which came to the Midwest after the conference in Denver and the excitement about Chicanismo as it spread throughout the country. And so he had a vision that there were Mexicans, and among the Mexicans there were people who had a spirit of rebellion. Even though he might have been a Catholic, he recognized a spirit of rebellion that went much further than that within the religious circle. And he realized that this could be a source of energizing a community to struggle in a way that it couldn't before. That's why Jose was involved in the campaign to elect Harold Washington, because he, as a Latino, felt that this would be an important step in the minorities of the city having their voice, and why he was involved in questions of Central American solidarity and other issues, and why he was an important figure. And I wanted to get this down, and I was very happy to do this, very much apart from my own plans of work. In the meantime, of course, I'm running out of time already, I know. I was working on another book that had taken me a long time to put together. I've been married to a Puerto Rican woman for 30 years, and there was a lot of pressure on me to do something for the Puerto Ricanos, not only the Mexicanos, or else I wasn't going to get dinner. So I decided to work on this. In fact, very early when Felix Badia founded the Latino Studies Journal, I drafted a piece for him on the Puerto Rican poets of Chicago. And that later developed into something that would repeat again and again. I thought, well, maybe it should be part of a book. Maybe we need to get out of this New York centrism on U.S. Puerto Rican. Maybe we need to do something that brings Chicago into it. And the press, by the way, fought with me to do a different cover from what I had intended, and they were right. And they did this really neat cover, which is a very strange-looking Puerto Rican flag with the title, Defending Their Own in the Cold, the Cultural Terms of U.S. Puerto Ricans, and they put on top of it an image of a city, and on the bottom, but of course the city on the bottom is New York. The city on the top is Chicago. And the major contribution, I think, of the book was to put the Chicago Puerto Rican questions on the map. So I went out of my way to focus on the poets and also to work on other materials in relation to the Chicago question. And it was never a complete book for me. I really thought I needed somebody, because what are Puerto Ricans famous for? Music culture. But there's very little about music culture in the book, not enough. But I did have an opening provided by Frances Aparicio when she wrote a book about Jennifer Lopez playing Selena in that famous movie. And her question was, why are they calling about Latinos? And I said, well, why is it a Puerto Rican gets that part? Well, Puerto Ricans have always had to play every kind of person because the representation in Hollywood or Broadway or everything was so very limited. West Side Story and a few other things along the way. And so it occurred to me there was this erasure of Puerto Ricans. And also a trend based on Oscar Lewis's work to borrar, to erase Puerto Ricanness, and so I felt I could bring it up and bring the Chicago material into question. I don't have time to read anything from this book, but I really felt happy because there are not too many books except Merida's work and mine that are, I think they're the only two that are specifically Puerto Rican in orientation, and so we were very happy to do that. And good luck to the press in the future.
My name is Jose Ángel Navejas, and I'm a PhD student here at the Spanish Department. I am currently working on a dissertation that's about something related but different to some of the things that we've been hearing here tonight. I talk about a new literary movement in Chicago that's different because it's completely done in Spanish. And it's similar because it's Latino. So there's a new sense of identity, a pan-Hispanic identity being developed in Chicago right now. And it can be reflected on the literature that the people have been writing starting in the 1990s right here in Pilsen. And Frankie Piña right here is like one of the main pillars of that movement. And we're gonna hear from her own autobiographical piece in 1 second. And Raúl Dorantes is also an author of some of the most fundamental works in Mexican literature of Chicago. He is not Mexican literature in Chicago, it's of Chicago. And you're gonna hear why. There's a difference there. I think what the authors of this movement are doing is putting into question all kinds of fixed ideas of belonging to one place. So we don't really know what we are. Are we Mexicans? Are we something else? So that's what's at play and what's at stake here. What are we trying to do or to be? So that's one of the questions that come. In this book, that's a book published by El Basement Press, which you can get in a little while, is, as far as I'm concerned, unless Jan knows better, the first collection of Mexican essays to be written in Chicago in Spanish. And I had the privilege of editing this volume, and some of the contributors are here today. Carolina is here in the back. But so there's Carolina, Frankie, Raúl, myself, and a few more people, 6 more people. And one of the main questions that we're trying to answer in this volume is what does it mean to be a Mexican writer in Chicago? Not necessarily what does it mean to be a Mexican writer who's traveling in Chicago and looking at Chicago as an intellectual tourist, but as someone who lives in the community and who is part of the community and who's trying to understand his place in the United States. And also, many times, as it is the case with, I believe, all 3 of us, what does it mean to be writing from the peripheries of society in Spanish? So, because we're a bilingual community, we're gonna make a switch. And we're going to be reading some of this material that is written in Spanish. And now I think the first one to read of her work is going to be Frankie Piña. Let me just say a few words about Frankie Piña. Without Frankie Piña, there will be no literature in Chicago, because no Spanish language literature, that is. And this is serious because the work that she's done from the very beginning in the 1990s has been fundamental. Most of the design of most of the magazines, cultural magazines that have appeared since the 1990s till the present have been almost exclusively the work of Frankie Piña. From Fe de Ratas, Tropel, Zorros y Erizos, Contratiempo, El Basement. There's a whole range of experiences that you can see in those magazines, and she is the one who's done most of the work, most of the designing, and this fabulous book cover is her own work. So I'm just gonna hand it over for her and Frankie. Thank you. for your work?
I think this is, it's not me, it's not about I. I think this is a group of people. And I think the presence of Spanish literature has been here since when the first Mexicans came. Because somehow they were related to corridos, to songs. And I think poetry is the first way to express their soul, more than short stories or novels. Because that's something that I think they can conduct their spirit to explain their social situation. So, but yes, I'm from that generation in the 1990s that I did myself. In fact, if I have to thank someone, that would be Raúl Dorantes, which he's my cousin, and I came here because he was already here. And I got involved in literature because he was doing literature, not because I wanted to do it. I didn't want to feel left out of the conversation, so I have to read and I have to try to say something kind of intelligent. So it's not, I became an author by accident, the same way that I became a designer by accident and also a cultural promoter and everything, so I am an accident. And so I'm going to be reading in Spanish the beginning of my contribution, my essay on this book, and the end of it, so you can have an idea, and hopefully if you read Spanish, I highly recommend you to buy the book. And we have also other books. It is important to tell you that in the last 10 years, there's been at least 120 books published in Spanish in Chicago, which is something very significant, and it means how the Spanish is really shining, not just in the city. Right now, with the new data that came out, there are about 8 million students learning Spanish in the US. So think about the market, but then there should be a literature about it. Not just about the Latin American literature, but also the literature being created in Spanish in the US. So this is from Chicago, and just the introduction, and then the last chapter. Devenir transmigrante en la Windy City. Habitando la lengua. Soy mexicana, transgénero, lesbiana e inmigrante. Vivo en Estados Unidos y encarno lo que Trump tanto detesta. Pero no nací mujer ni migrante. Me hice en el camino y me suscribo a la rúbrica de Sor Juana. Yo, la peor de todas. Y esta es la última parte. No se nace mujer, se llega a serlo. En México yo era otro, en Chicago soy otra. Desde que inicié mi proceso de transición y la terapia de reemplazo hormonal, he buscado interiorizar y observar mis vivencias al ser mujer mexicana inmigrante y transgénero. He ido hilando mi verdad con letras y actos performativos corporales. Sé que biológicamente no nací mujer, pero no basta con nacer. Cito, no se hace mujer, se llega a serlo. Verbigracia, Simone de Beauvoir. La ausencia de útero no me hace más ni menos mujer. Ser mujer es una construcción social, es una construcción jurídica, es una construcción médica. O sea, es una ficción. Ser es una idea, como idea es la libertad, y las ideas se crean libremente, caen por peso propio y resurgen de las cenizas. El ser no es estático, más bien es fluido como el agua que lleva el río de Heráclito. Reza una máxima persa atribuida a Shams de Tabriz, maestro de Rumi. Don't go with the flow, be the flow. Desde la resiliencia me deconstruyo y me reinvento, pero no soy la única. Pertenezco a una minoría dentro de una minoría, y si algo he llegado a vislumbrar en la comunidad trans, es que siempre existe una tribu más vulnerable de la que somos parte. Nunca llegamos a tocar fondo, porque siempre hay un socavón más abajo. Por años viví convencida de que la comunidad inmigrante era el grupo más vejado del mosaico que conforma la sociedad estadounidense. Reportes y estadísticas lo constataban, y aunque en el fondo me atraía la libertad de las vestidas, ahora mujeres transgénero, nunca reconocí públicamente que era una de ellas. Un vínculo del sentir nos hermanaba, pero ellas iban más adelante en su transición. Yo me rezagué. En el despuntar del siglo, llegué a entrevistar a no menos de una docena de mujeres trans, incluyendo a la legendaria Miss Kitty, para un documental que nunca vio la luz. Ellas tampoco la veían, pues llevaban una vida noctivaga. Habían logrado construirse cuerpos monumentales y para sobrevivir crearon su propio mundo del espectáculo. La sobrevivencia de la mujer inmigrante transexual en Chicago ha estado acompañada por un puñado de oficios: showgirl, cultora de belleza, prostituta, mula y dealer. Ser mujer transgénero inmigrante es vivir constantemente en el filo de la navaja, pero también significa romper con lo establecido, como propone la socióloga transgénero Ariane Manzanares. Significa saltar los obstáculos impuestos por el Estado, la medicina, la iglesia y la sociedad. Vivir como mujer transgénero también conlleva visibilizar la transexualidad en lo político, social y cultural. Implica luchar por igualdad de derechos. ¿En qué lugar social, cultural y político se encuentra la comunidad transgénero en Chicago cuando las estadísticas son inexistentes? ¿De qué manera esta comunidad confronta la segregación racial, el clasismo y la ausencia de equidad? La edad promedio de una mujer translatina es de 35 años y de los pocos estudios y encuestas que se han realizado, incluyendo el del National Center for Transgender Equality 2015, coinciden en las siguientes condiciones: sufre acoso y violencia, vive en condiciones de pobreza extrema, padece discriminación en el sector salud, carece de oportunidades educativas, su acceso a la vivienda es limitado. Desde los privilegios que me rodean como escritora y gestora cultural, he escuchado cuantiosos y punzantes testimonios de la comunidad mexicana inmigrante y transgénero. A pesar de la opresión y marginalización, no todo es tragedia, no todo es desdicha. La liquidez cultural causa efectos transformativos. No pocas y pocos han ido tomando conciencia. En 2006, aproximadamente 4 millones de inmigrantes salieron a las calles cuando la propuesta de ley Sensenbrenner pretendía criminalizar a los inmigrantes y a aquellos que les tendieran la mano. La mayoría de ellos eran de origen mexicano. La conciencia de ser de los mexicanos en Chicago ha vigorizado las artes. Los registros no son cuantiosos, tampoco son pocos. Sobreviven algunos murales de la década de 1980. La obra de Sandra Cisneros ha alcanzado la madurez plasmando literalmente las inquietudes de los hijos de los inmigrantes. Las obras teatrales de Raúl Dorantes han hecho de la inmigración un tratado filosófico. Los magníficos claroscuros de Elsa Muñoz dan luz nueva a la plástica. La obra poética de Jorge Hernández es un elogio a la forma y al fondo. Las instalaciones de Marco Raya son irónicas, demoledoras. El arte es una tabla de salvación, no solo para la comunidad que la produce, sino porque tiene la capacidad de aguijonear la conciencia de las otras, de los otros, y tal vez nos pueda ayudar a trascender el sistema patriarcal opresor y crear narrativas alternas que sustenten un mundo justo, igualitario, equitativo y feminista. Fiel a mi generación, mi sueño consistía en emigrar aceptar mi identidad de género y también vivir una vida moldeada a imagen y semejanza de la cultura del espectáculo. Dichosamente fracasé. Ahora que he roto el yugo del closet, a mi edad solo podré interpretar a Paquita la del barrio en el draw show de la cueva. Por fortuna, he comenzado a trascender mi identidad de género. Creo que ahora me toca trascender la mexicanidad y dichosamente sumarme al todo, a la toda. Mi historia es parte de la historia de la inmigración y va de la mano con la creciente proliferación de la literatura en español en Estados Unidos. Creo que una comunidad perseguida y marginada puede producir textos hermosamente desgarradores, pero plasmados decorosamente. La herida está abierta y el lenguaje está vivo. Quizá ya sea hora de alejarse de la decencia y radicalizar las letras, las artes y fundar una tribu sin patria ni dogmas. Gracias.
Gracias por la invitación, gracias Frankie por presentarme. Bueno, como bien decía Frankie, yo creo que los inmigrantes de alguna manera somos un accidente, porque el que era campesino en México acá se vuelve cocinero o se vuelve un experto en landscaping, y creo que lo mismo sucede en el mundo de las artes. Yo nunca me imaginé que iba a escribir, ¿sí? Mi padre me mandó a mí, también a mi hermano Jaime, para que tuviéramos éxito, y éxito significaba pues abrir un supermercado. Mi papá imaginaba que sus dos hijos iban a tener un supermercado Dorantes 1 y 2 años después supermercado Dorantes 2. Pues no sucedió así. Conocí la biblioteca de Pilsen y ahí fue donde empecé a leer, y es lo que veía Frankie cuando llegó, ¿verdad? Que iba a la biblioteca y empecé a leer como no lo había hecho en mi vida. Y lo mismo con el teatro. En 2010 empecé a escribir teatro porque no encontraban en Chicago, una compañía local, una obra que hablara sobre la problemática migrante, con personajes migrantes, y yo escribía cuentos y me llamaron y yo dije, bueno, yo ni siquiera manejo el diálogo, el formato teatral, y me dijeron te vamos a pagar. Bueno, yo les avisé. Entonces la primera vez que recibí algo por el trabajo que había hecho, entonces he seguido en el teatro y publiqué en Palabras Migrantes. José Ángel Navejas me hizo el favor de incluir un texto sobre el teatro y la patria migrante, y como el sábado pasado tomó lugar la tercera Feria del Libro de Chicago, participé en un panel, y a partir de ahí dije, no, para el miércoles en UIC mejor voy a escribir un texto que tenga que ver con el teatro y con algo más, a partir de lo que sucedió en la Feria del Libro. El texto que escribí se llama Teatro Migrante y el Salto del Jaguar. ¿En qué momento se halla el teatro en español en Chicago? Esa es la pregunta con que se anunció uno de los paneles de la tercera Feria del Libro, y la respuesta es simple: en muy buen momento. Hay una docena de compañías que van del teatro costumbrista a lo que podría acercarse al contemporáneo o vanguardista. Y si hace 10 años solo una compañía contaba con un teatro propio, hoy también cuentan con su espacio, repertorio latino, green light y tariácula. El cuentista guatemalteco Augusto Monterroso dijo que siempre hay que agradecer a los que llegaron primero. Y antes de nosotros, en los años 70, hubo compañías de teatro chicano, boricua, proletario, campesino. Ellos nos trajeron el mito de Aztlán y la rebeldía taína. Así pusieron las primeras piedras. Se puede decir que el teatro es un fin en sí mismo. En mi caso ha sido más un medio. De la misma manera que en los años 90 fueron un medio el producir revistas, escribir ficción o participar en talleres de lectura. Y paso a explicar. En el verano del 92 me asaltó con furia el quién soy. Acababa de estar en México de visita y algo ya no encajaba. Seguía queriendo a mis hermanos, a mis padres, amigos, pero algo se había movido. Parafraseando a Neruda, nosotros, los de entonces, ya no éramos los mismos. Para hablar de mi identidad latinoamericana, contaba aquí en Chicago con las novelas del boom, la poesía de Vallejo, de Martí, las venas abiertas de América Latina. También tenía referentes para responder en qué consistía mi identidad mexicana: Octavio Paz y El laberinto de la soledad, Monsiváis, Poniatowska. Pero no encontré en español referentes para responder a esa pregunta desde mi identidad inmigrante. Frente a esa identidad solo había un vacío incómodo, algo parecido al desamparo. El primer dios de los olmecas fue el jaguar, y mi jaguar lo sentía lejos. A mediados de los 90, la migración latinoamericana en Chicago era un grupo vasto de hombres y mujeres que en principio no habían querido abandonar la ranchería o el pueblo. Su querencia era la que dejaban, no a la que llegaban. Esa experiencia migratoria solo se explicaba y se sigue explicando desde dos frentes: los números y las reivindicaciones políticas. ¿Cuántos inmigrantes cruzan cada año? ¿Cuántos son deportados? ¿Cuál es el monto de las remesas? Y si hablamos de las reivindicaciones, basta citar la amnistía para todos los indocumentados y la no separación de las familias. Varios de los que publicábamos Fe de Ratas nos dimos cuenta que había otros ríos por explorar y que la literatura era el medio idóneo. Uno de esos ríos era el hecho de que los inmigrantes latinoamericanos en Chicago ya rebasábamos el 1,000,000 y de que teníamos iglesias, negocios, clubes de fútbol, representantes en el City Council, en el Congreso, pero no teníamos un solo cementerio. Era como si estuviésemos aquí para establecer las cosas de la vida, pero no las de la muerte. Era como si el imaginario nos ayudase solo en nuestro paso por la tierra y no en la trascendencia. Ya pasaron 25 años de la publicación del último Fe de Ratas, ya rebasamos los 2 millones y seguimos sin fundar un cementerio. Traer al jaguar, sacarlo de nuestras tripas, que ruja en las planicies del Midwest y nos devore hasta volvernos a sus entrañas. Como el río de la muerte, había otros ríos profundos que demandaban nuestra atención. La idea del regreso, el cumplir con nuestro papel de gente trabajadora y dócil, las relaciones con esas otredades que encontramos en el trabajo y en la calle. Hoy, con el declive del modelo económico neoliberal, habría que agregar otro tema: el fin de la migración latinoamericana. ¿Acaso pronto salte el jaguar y junto con ese dios felino vengan Viracocha y la Virgen y Yemayá? De la docena de mis amigos escritores, en los 90, solo 2 compartían el interés por profundizar en estos temas: Franky Piña y Febronio Sacarain. Las conversaciones con Febronio nos llevaron a la escritura de una serie de crónicas y ensayos en mancuerna a lo largo de 8 años. Vayamos al 2011. Más que en la novela y el cuento, encontré en el teatro un medio para compartir estas inquietudes. En la segunda producción de Colectivo El Pozo, en la obra llamada De Camino a Lorita, comprendí que dichas inquietudes no eran solo de 3 o 4 gatos, eran de una comunidad, pues la asistencia rebasó las 600 personas. Desde ese 2011, cada producción nuestra ha seguido manejando la inmigración como temática y como contextos, y cada producción ha contado con un público amplio. La propuesta de Colectivo El Pozo ha sido un cordón, un mecate de 3 cabos: la migración, el comentario político y la experiencia de la nada. No es una propuesta que hayamos buscado. Como el tigre que abre la maleza con sus pasos, así nos fue llegando. Nuestro objetivo en El Pozo ha sido la comunión. Hay comunión cuando los actores, la parte técnica y el público comparten la risa o un sentimiento triste. Pero hay una comunión mayor en los momentos de silencio colectivo, cuando el tiempo queda suspendido y nos fugamos todos al centro de la historia. Ahí borramos nuestra individualidad y nos volvemos realmente uno. Además, se ha logrado tener una dirección colectiva. Esto es algo que se puede alcanzar si hay química entre los que integran el elenco y la parte escénica. Hay ratos de caos, es cierto, pero cuando nos rendimos ante la obra, surge una voz con la respuesta. A veces mis amigos sugieren que ya estuvo bueno con eso del tema de los inmigrantes, que ya le cambie de canal, me dicen, ya chale Raúl, ya estuvo bueno. Por el contrario, yo creo que este viaje apenas comienza. El jaguar está al acecho, esperando. ¿Quiénes van a explorar con plenitud estas temáticas y estos contextos? Sospecho que eso le corresponderá a los hijos de ese pueblo que llegó desde la náhuatl y desde el lejano Tahuantinsuyo. Seguramente los hijos, nuestros hijos, abrirán los brazos para recibir finalmente el salto del jaguar.
Buenas noches. Bueno, quiero hablar un poco sobre mi propia experiencia como inmigrante, que tiene mucho en común con lo que acaba de hablar Raúl. Yo tampoco vine aquí pensando que venía a convertirme en escritor. Yo tenía otros planes, menos ambiciosos, ¿no? Yo había venido a lavar trastes, o a lavar baños, o a limpiar oficinas, o cualquier cosa que pudiera hacer con un mínimo de educación, el mínimo de educación que tenía, que era el de secundaria en mi país de origen, que es México. Así que lo que ocurrió cuando yo llegué es que una de las cosas de las que me di cuenta es que tenía que aprender inglés si quería sobrevivir en esta comunidad. Y lo aprendí, y eventualmente en esa escuela de inglés me dijeron que si quería en realidad ser exitoso tenía que sacar mi GED. Y fui y lo saqué. Me dijeron, léete este libro, un libro enorme, me dijeron, es un libro muy gordo. Tómate el examen y te van a dar un diploma. Y dije, ok, libro, examen, diploma. Listo, no hay problema. Pero no era tan fácil, para nada, ¿no? Lo tomé una vez, lo reprobé. La segunda vez lo volví a reprobar. La tercera vez, al final lo pasé, ¿no? Pero algo que no pasó fue que nadie vino a buscarme a darme un mejor empleo, como me habían dicho. Nadie vino, ¿no?, tocando a la puerta y te vamos a dar una mejor chamba, ¿no?, ahora que tienes tu GED. Eso no pasó. Nunca ocurrió eso, ¿no? Así que terminé todavía trabajando en el mismo restaurante donde había estado por muchos años, hasta que un buen verano, trabajando con algunos jóvenes que iban y regresaban cíclicamente, eran como migrantes hasta cierto punto, ¿no? Porque eran estudiantes universitarios que se iban a estudiar en universidades de otros estados y regresaban los veranos a su casa a trabajar en el restaurante mexicano donde yo trabajaba también, ¿no? Y yo estaba trabajando junto a ellos porque para entonces me habían ascendido de lavaplatos a busboy, ¿no? Y yo trabajaba limpiando mesas. Y entonces yo, los veía regresar, ¿no?, año tras año, y me daba curiosidad de saber qué es lo que estaba pasando. Yo sabía que algo estaba ocurriendo dentro de ellos, pero no sabía qué. Esto es un texto que yo escribí originalmente en inglés hace más de 10 años y aquí estoy reflexionando sobre la primera vez que vine a este campus, a la sesión de orientación. Al llegar al campus reconocí rápidamente el entorno. Recordé que muchos años atrás, cuando apenas llevaba unas semanas en Chicago, pasé cerca de la entrada principal en la calle Halsted. Yo iba en una camioneta de jardinería. Metido entre mi primo y nuestro jefe, íbamos camino a podar el césped de alguna persona rica. Sin prospecto alguno de asistir a la universidad algún día, miré las hordas de estudiantes que entraban y salían del edificio principal. Caminaban a prisa frente a nosotros, con las mochilas llenas de promesas, de sabiduría. Mientras esperábamos en la camioneta a que la luz del semáforo se pusiera verde, me asaltaron muchas emociones. Me sentí secretamente avergonzado, enojado, emocionado y esperanzado. Dos mundos se cruzaban en el camino, el de adentro de la camioneta y el de afuera. Yo pertenecía al primero. No había lugar para mí en la fresca sombra del salón de clases, ni en la comodidad de las salas de estudio, ni en las discusiones en las salas de conferencias, ni en el sagrado silencio de la biblioteca. Esos lugares definitivamente no eran para mí. Yo pertenecía al aire libre. Mi trabajo era físico más que mental. Mi fraternidad era con la enorme podadora. Bajo el calor opresivo del verano que se acercaba, el hombre y la máquina estaban destinados a convertirse en uno solo. Estableceríamos un paso parejo, una danza armoniosa al ritmo del motor de la podadora, mientras yo me apuraba detrás de ella. Una danza impulsada por el aroma a gasolina quemada, a pasto recién cortado, a la intensa humedad veraniega que me provocaría una candente urticaria, haciendo que el cuerpo entero me picara y me ardiera. Aún así, sentado ahí, yo miraba, hechizado. El mundo frente a mí parecía tan distante. Era tan ajeno el espectáculo que se desplegaba frente a mí que hasta los estudiantes parecían pertenecer a otra especie. ¿Qué estaba haciendo yo, un mexicano pobre, tan cerca de Estados Unidos y tan lejos de Dios? Ahora, camino en mi sesión de orientación, me encontré cruzando la mismísima calle por la que aquella vez atravesara, recreando la escena de hacía años, pero desde una perspectiva diferente. El mundo del que me había sentido excluido ahora me abría sus puertas, me daba la bienvenida y me hacía sentir importante, privilegiado. Habían quedado atrás los días del agotador trabajo físico. Ahora estaba listo y decidido a mostrarle mi potencial a todos, aunque no tuviera la menor idea de quiénes eran todos, ni qué potencial me estaba imaginando. De hecho, ahora que lo pienso, lo que me enorgullecía era la sola idea de asistir a la universidad, más que la posibilidad de éxito. No sabía qué haría después de graduarme, ya que mi comprensión de la educación universitaria era más ideológica que pragmática. Desde el momento en el que 2 años antes había tomado mi primera clase de filosofía, atesoré secreta y pasionalmente e incluso argumenté la idea de que un hombre educado, si de verdad pretendía serlo, debía cultivar su intelecto antes que prestar atención a las demandas pecuniarias que el mundo le imponía. El alimento de la mente debía tener prioridad sobre la banalidad concreta de la vida cotidiana. Así hablaba mi yo dogmático. Cegado por la luz que emanaba de la caverna platónica, me aferré con fuerza a mis ideales. Mi fe en la vida de la mente se mantuvo impetérrita. Así fue que comenzó mi primer año como estudiante de filosofía en UIC. Y eso es parte de mi experiencia aquí en UIC. All right, so we'll take questions now in English, Spanish, or Spanglish. Your pick.
I'd like to say something about the plays and the political space. I was a student here at UIC many moons ago. I'm an old lady. But I'll tell you, we had a visiting professor, actor from Venezuela, and he was not allowed to go back into his country because of the fact that he had such strong socialist/communist beliefs. So we went to one of the deans, and we were able to keep him on here as a professor, and then he created a group with his students, and so we performed at a lot of different states here in the United States.
Do you remember his
And
name?
the first play that we put on was En algún lugar un día bajo el sol, and it was all about imperialism. And then we put it on not only for schools, but then we also put it on, taught at an adult education center at the time. We went over there, we put that on there too. So I really like what you're doing, but way back in the day, we're talking about late 60s, early 70s, we had that going on. So UIC was awesome because they allowed him to stay on and then to teach us. In addition to that, I was raised in South Chicago. I was born in Mexico, but I was raised in South Chicago. And we were just talking about the fact that we did have another theater group that was very, very, very much socially conscious group. And they would put on a lot of plays also for us. So
In what years?
In what years, yeah.
We're talking about late 60s, early 70s,
Okay.
maybe even mid 60s. Because back in the day, who was it? Corky Gonzalez? I don't know. I am Joaquin. Okay, I'm from that era. That's a long time back. But yes, we had all of that happening, and it was awesome. And I was in bilingual education. Then I left Chicago to go live in Indiana, and I went into something totally different. And guess what? Now I'm a language specialist, and now I'm teaching English as a second language. I taught Spanish for about 35 years. Now for the last 5 actually, I've been teaching English as what they call a new language, not as a second language. Now it's a new language. So my students are from the Congo, they're from Vietnam, they're from Guatemala, they're from Mexico, they're from all over. But it is really wonderful, and I'm thinking, hey, I was in bilingual education, I was doing this way back in the day. But, you know, nuestros caminos siempre cambian. So I'm glad that you're doing what you're doing, and I'd like to read some of your plays.
Thank you.
¿Cómo se empieza a desarrollar una idea? Más que nada para una persona que no tiene un estudio en el área de literatura, completamente diferente. Pero ¿cómo se empieza a desarrollar una idea? ¿Cómo se busca integrar una experiencia en una escritura?
¿Quieres contestar eso, Frankie? Hablo un poco de ello en mi ensayo. Cuando llegué y comencé a involucrarme a leer al boom latinoamericano primero y después a otros autores europeos porque eran los maestros de los del boom latinoamericano, pues me agradaba descubrir ese mundo, pero me di cuenta que sus experiencias no reflejaban mi experiencia, mi condición de inmigrante, mi condición de trabajador aquí en una fábrica que estaba aquí a la vuelta. Y yo creo que eso lo estaba buscando, quería escuchar un registro, no estaba en los medios, en los periódicos que se leían. Entonces había un gran hueco, un gran espacio. Y además el contacto con la gente en la organización que trabajaba, sus historias de inmigrantes, trabajaba para heredé el trabajo creo que de Raúl antes que se fuera a Cuba en la organización de Midwest Coalition in Defense of Immigrants, era hablar con inmigrantes todo el tiempo. Y para mí era un descubrir esas historias. A mí me trajo la idea de MTV, la vida de los suburbios, pero llegué a Pilsen y no se parecían para nada. Entonces, y la gente tampoco se reflejaba a lo que estaba en la televisión. Y para mí fue una especie de renacimiento, de escuchar estas historias, y poco a poco me fui asumiendo inmigrante, y esas historias no las encontraba ni en Carlos Fuentes, ni en todos los escritores que había estado leyendo. Entonces creo que había necesidad de inventarlas, de narrarlas, de empezar en el periodismo, escucharlas hasta que poco a poco uno va tocando lo que uno siente, lo que uno explora. Y creo que es a partir del sentir, de la honestidad del ser humano, lo que nos va a llevar a escribir, el comprenderlo. O sea, porque no ha sido solamente un ejercicio literario, sino es con otras disciplinas, el periodismo, el ensayo, porque una sola área no va a poder definirnos, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que eso ha sido un poquito de todo. Y en los temas, pues están ahí, hay que sentirlos. Y si no se sienten, pues yo creo que son vacíos. Es como leer La frontera de cristal que tú mencionabas de Carlos Fuentes. Cuando vino al museo pasó en una limusín por la 18 y escribió un cuento por la 18 sin bajar el cristal, porque olía a carnitas Don Pedro. Entonces, pero si no se siente eso, o sea, ¿cómo vas a describir el olor de las carnitas?
El olor de las carnitas. ¿Puedo decir algo más sobre este tema? Para ustedes que están empezando a pensar en escribir, yo tengo 80 años, yo empecé a escribir como cuentista a la edad de 72. Entonces no importa tu edad, si ya tienes las ganas de hacerlo, claro, es bueno entrar en una clase donde hay otros que están haciéndolo y puedes participar con ellos para no estar tan solo en el asunto. Pero hay en este momento unas casas editoriales que realmente están listos a publicar una narrativa de la vida. Como eso es ilegal, se hizo la prensa universitaria de Illinois, que eso es muy raro, muy especial, porque muchas veces las prensas universitarias no publican un texto así, y ha tenido gran éxito, creo, el texto. Pero hay una casa editorial donde yo empecé a publicar porque, aunque yo no soy latino, escribo, mis temas generalmente son latinos, tienen que ver, y ellos decidieron publicarme y me siento muy bien porque me siento entre muchos otros. Y claro, muchos de ellos solamente escriben un libro porque es el libro de su vida, pero aún así es lindo. Y claro, uno puede entrar también en las vidas de los demás. Cuando entras en las vidas de los demás y relacionas eso con tu vida, ya tienes una base de escribir bastante. La prensa que pueden revisar también se llama Floricanto. Y está en California. El editor era miembro del equipo de la revista Atzlan y decidió que quería hacer algo más literario y se fue para este rumbo. Y publican cosas en grande, imprimen en grande, letra grande, porque quieren que gente que no está acostumbrada a leer pueda leer. Y publican en español y en inglés, los dos, y tal vez otros idiomas también.
So my parents are Mexican, and I was born and raised here in Chicago, so I'm a little biased to the series and how important it is and the work that y'all are doing. But I just had a question about, what is it that you feel the Chicago context contributes to this idea of Latinidad, and why it's important in our current state, and why is it that you're really passionate to do this kind of work about this city or, in a Midwestern context?
Sure. You too? You want to start? It's a wonderful question. I sometimes say something that offends some people from the Southwest, and I don't mean to do that because I have a lot of great friends from the Southwest. But in the book, I actually say that in many ways, Mexican Chicago is closer to Mexico than many of the cities in the Southwest. And the reason I make that claim is not a criticism, of course, of the cities of the Southwest, of the Mexican communities there, but it's to say that the Mexican people who I write about are arriving directly from Mexico here, and they're bringing the politics of Mexico directly here. And the Mexicans I write about, we're not competing for the cultural representation of the community with an already well-established Mexican-American community. And in some ways, that's a product of the brutal deportation campaigns that I mentioned that occurred as early as 1921 into the context of the Great Depression during the late 20s and 30s and into the 50s. So you have these periodic waves of deportation which prevent a larger Mexican-American community from developing. And so when these waves of Mexicans are often arriving, they're often arriving as I'm saying, they're not arriving in a place with an already well-established Mexican-American community. And so for me, Chicago is so important because I too am born in Chicago. I'm from the South Side, from a community that is often called the Bush. And I'm from there, and I came here for my PhD in the Department of History here. And so Chicago is where my heart beats, and it's always a place that I love and miss, and to then write a book about Mexicans in Chicago. I was once told by a scholar that as a historian, your first book is often really an autobiography. And in many ways, my book is about the Mexican people that I knew in the city when I was here studying, but that I found were here in the 1920s, in the 1930s, in the 1940s, and have sort of a legacy here that needs to be recovered and talked about.
Thank you for your question. Someone who's also born and raised in Chicago, I think for me what's been fascinating about my own fascination with the city is the ways in which the city has rejected in many ways the communities we come from, and that these very communities still decided to carve out spaces for themselves, right? And so it's always constantly, I think that work that went behind that meant that then you own the city in a particular kind of way, whether you own property, whether you're able to kind of claim it in certain ways, but I think it was the work that was put into that. So I think that for me was one of the things that made my own kind of trajectory, made my own, the kinds of questions that I asked always came from that position of claiming a space that didn't always want to claim me, right? I think the second thing was that I grew up on the north side of the city, and I actually grew up in a Latino neighborhood, right? A Latinx neighborhood. So those around me were Cuban, were Mexican. So it was this way in which reading things about other communities, it wasn't always just a Puerto Rican community, or it wasn't always a Mexican community. So what is it about Chicago, and how does it matter, right? In terms of when I had said earlier about Elena Padilla, how does place matter, and how is it who you're surrounded by matters? That did something not only to a sense of being Latina, but it did something to how I saw myself as Puerto Rican, and me being Puerto Rican always had to do with also knowing something about Mexican culture, always knowing something about Cuban culture, right? African American culture as well as white culture, right? And even then a white ethnic culture, Polish, right? More than this idea of an American kind of homogenous, right, culture. And so those things, I think, weren't always reflected in the kinds of things that I was reading, and so that's where my questions came from. And so a lot of those questions, and then the other piece of it is just the stories of women, right? We don't always hear about the stories of women, and one of the things that Elena Padilla did is she talked about the migration of Puerto Ricans to Chicago was actually the migration of women. The first people coming here in larger numbers was domestic workers, right? And yet we don't tell the story in those ways. And so how does that matter in terms of how we understand Puerto Rican identity, right, in the city?
I was wondering, one of the things you mentioned, John, was that you were going to talk about how the book was, what you wanted to teach with the book. And I kind of felt like I wanted to hear more about that. In particular, you've now moved to a very different part of the Midwest where you're teaching, I would imagine, a very different kind of population, and how you find it useful and how they're reacting to the message that you're bringing about those different communities that were seeking either a home or to build a new home here or to go back to their old home. Now that you have moved, how have you been able to use what you've learned in teaching in a different location?
I think I offer a number of arguments in the book, and therefore I hope you all read my book. But one of the big themes that I tried leaving everybody here with is this theme of, well, let me put it this way. During our marches in, 2006 that were mentioned earlier, I mean, what was one of the most common chants? Si se puede, right? Si se puede. That was a common one. And you know, in the European Union, you know what African, Asian, South Asian, East Asian immigrants chant when they're there? We are here because you are there. And what they mean by that, of course, is we are here in your nation states because your nation states, your corporations, your militaries have a long history of being in our homelands. And in fact, you've been there, you're there right now, you're profiting there right now, and no one is compelling you, forcing you to become U.S. or to become citizens of our nation, of our homelands. So that's what they chant there. And in some ways, what I'm suggesting is that the Mexican liberals that I write about, who really established a profound intellectual community in Chicago in the 1920s, that I talk about in chapter 1, that created plays, that wrote stories, that started newspapers, that created all sorts of cultural productions. And what I show in the book is as they became friends with, in the Chicago context, with Nicaraguans, especially in the context of our US occupation of Nicaragua in the 1920s, the way they saw that occupation, it was hard to celebrate the 4th of July here when you know your friends are being occupied by the US military, and Augusto Cesar Sandino is saying, get out of our country, United States. And so that's just one example of the way the relationships between Latinos, between Latinx people, between Mexicans in this case and Nicaraguans, begins to really shape the politics and identities of all of these communities in a way I think that was different than what occurred in a lot of other parts of the country. And I talk about that, but that was a history I was only able to recover. That is the impact of Nicaraguans and on Salvadorans, Hondurans, South Americans, Argentines who appear in my book in the 20s. I was only able to recover their stories through the naturalization records because the census and other documents do a really poor job of preserving these people's imprint on the city of Chicago. But then to just connect that to my own story, you know, it's an interesting story because in chapter 3 where I deal with the radicals, which I have, you know, my heart beats with them in a particular way. When I deal with the radicals, I sort of trace the radicals building communist groups in Mexico City, and then they jump, interestingly, to Cleveland, Ohio, and then to Chicago, where they establish a movement here that gets involved in the growth of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And so, you know, I think as our panelists have all alluded to and talked about, Mexicans, but many people, migrate all over and have a rich history of settling in different places and moving from one place to another. So my experience of migrating to Cleveland because of work, I mean, there's an irony there, right? That I write about Mexicans who have to leave Mexico for work, and I had to leave Chicago for work and had to go to Cleveland, But I have found community there, as many of the people I write about in my book found community, and as many of the panelists have found community here. And I think this is the way that happens, right? With organizations like this, with people creating these kinds of opportunities for people to network, meet each other, and then create things. And that's very much a part of my story and the stories of the people I write about.
Muchas gracias por compartir su historia. Yo soy de Perú, pero para escuchar todas sus historias es un orgullo también. Y Frankie Piña, muchas gracias por todos sus contributions to the Spanish literature. Basically, my question is really broad, but it's for anybody to answer. What is your wish for Chicago Latinos for the future?
No, es muy buena la pregunta porque yo sí me persigue eso. Digo, bueno, ¿qué es lo que viene? Yo creo que está conectado con el mito. Creo que nos hemos establecido aquí, pero de una manera parcial, más o menos lo que digo en el texto. Aquí hemos establecido nuestra vida, pero no nuestra muerte. Y eso no es fácil. O sea, establecer la muerte implica la creación, la reactivación de un mito, como lo hicieron los jóvenes de Aztlán, el movimiento chicano. Pero creo yo, tal vez no esté de acuerdo el profesor Zimmerman, que se quedó a la mitad o a la tercera parte, debió seguir avanzando y que hay que retomar y darle vida al mito y establecernos aquí en la vida y en la muerte de los latinos. No sé de qué manera que hablo del cementerio, tal vez como una metáfora o como un espacio físico, pero debe ser un espacio psicológico, espiritual, y en eso pueden contribuir mucho, obviamente, los creadores de canciones, los poetas, los músicos, los pintores. O sea, contribuir todo. Un mito lo establece, lo reactiva un pueblo. Si yo digo, ¿qué veo para el futuro de la comunidad latina? Es my wishful thinking, el mito.
Muy bien, pues yo creo que hemos llegado al final de este evento. Les damos las gracias a todos por haber venido. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. It was a great event. We're very happy to have you here. Thank you all.
I'd like to thank all the authors. Thank you so much for sharing your work and also the words of inspiration for all of us here today.